Connor Tomlinson has come back with us, writer for Courage Media. Our colleagues at the Times, of course, were behind this. They asked Gen Z what they thought of Britain, Connor. They found that half of Generation Z, or Z, think that Britain is a racist country and only a tenth would risk their lives to defend it in war. What's happened? Because that's way down on what it was just a couple of decades ago.
So I'll act as a Zoomer translator.
Yes.
So I think partially what's going on here is you've got a couple of different groups looking at the same TV screen and coming away with different interpretations.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of your listeners, Ian, who are slightly older than me, when they think of a young Zoomer who will not go and fight to defend his country, they think of a young white guy who looks like me, probably with a sort of curly broccoli style haircut, who won't go and fight the Nazis in the trenches of France.
Yes.
That's not what's happening. We have been raised on a diet, especially those who have entered the secondary education system since around the 2010s, on, at one hand, Britain being defined by tolerance, pluralism, diversity, British values that the Blairites and their successors in the Cameron Conservative Party invented. And on the other hand, what version of British history do you get taught? It's the slave trade, it's the First and Second World Wars, it's the Empire only for negative reasons, it's the American struggle for civil rights, which has cross-pollination over the Atlantic, which says that basically all we ever did throughout history is oppress black people, were really mean to gays, didn't give women the vote, and isn't it great that white men have taken a backseat? So if you, as a young white guy, see that as the vision of your country that's been projected, you don't find yourself a place in there, and you see all the foreign policy adventures overseas being about bringing pride parades to Iran or democracy in Ukraine, all these abstract values you don't feel represents you, why would you enlist in the army and go and fight for that country?
Indeed. And schools who have a, LGBTQ plus XYZ month, so each day the kids will learn a bit, and I'm thinking, what year is it, for God's sake? I did that at school. We had a couple of lessons on, some people are straight, some people are gay, that's how it is, get over it, you like it, you don't like it, fine, we move on. Gay rights needed to go through a period of, making sure people didn't get beaten up in the streets. No one wants to see that. Stonewall back then did an amazing job. That's exactly what they were set out to do. And then they realised they had nothing left to do because they thought, well, our job's done, basically. We've got equality. Oh, I know, we'll go for the trans thing. It's the ongoing campaign, isn't it? The left-wing thinking that you never settle it. And if you look at the racism thing, which has got me ever since that bloke got killed in America by the cops, George Floyd, where suddenly the whole narrative, my country was being described like Johannesburg in 1978. Or, I don't know, somewhere in the deep south of America in 1968. It's like, what is this?
Well, what's interesting...
Why have we been taken back on this kind of imagined narrative that everything is, it's, as things got better, somebody came along from that area of thinking and said, we've got to reset it, let's take it back, because then we can have the arguments again.
Well, I think the increase in ethnic diversity among Gen Z has caused this split. I mean, you say, for example, Stonewall lobbying for the ability for gay people to go about their daily business and not be attacked, right? If you then import a large diaspora of Muslims, second and third generation, according to Henry Jackson Society polling, are more likely to be intolerant, even if they're university educated, then you've increased that level of homophobia or intolerance or illiberalism,
and yet the same group of people support both.
Exactly. So you're almost engineering your own crisis. But what I found really interesting about this Times polling is the commentary alongside it. They predominantly spoke to ethnic minorities, and one woman, her name was Summer.
That. I thought it was interesting.
Well, her name was Summer. She said, we are not taught black history, and the truth is that Britain was founded on anti-black racism. It's like, hang on, do you think that people from sub-Saharan Africa built Hadrian's Wall, or that Hengist and Horsa were from North Africa when they came over and purchased the UK? Yes. She's learned American talking points after 2020 and is importing them over here. And all of these narratives about, again, George Floyd, again, there's irregularities about the judgment there, but we didn't examine the fact that there was a massive race riot that happened in America. Very few people were prosecuted for that. And instead, even though we've got completely different cultural conditions, our Prime Minister still took the knee. We still revolutionised the education system to emphasise anti-black racism and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, so it's just one big cross-continuity narrative that doesn't apply to Britain.
Yeah, it was, that era I thought was one of the most embarrassing, apart from the dangers, if you like, of teaching kids bad education or having a system of bad education. It was just embarrassing to see this. The knee thing was on another level. I went from being angry to almost wanting to laugh at it, because it was such a bizarre bit of choreography that people were being asked to. You didn't take the knee, as if that was perfectly, as if that was a perfectly normal thing to do. Get on your knee. You know, really? Where has this come from? This was never there literally 3 seconds ago. And now you've got the Prime Minister in waiting and Angela Rayner on the knee, police officers being shouted at and forced onto the knee in our district for a gesture that didn't even exist in this country.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned apartheid South Africa, because at the moment, if you look at, and this is why Elon Musk and Donald Trump have been tweeting about that, if you look at the way that South Africa has gone from the hope of solidarity between the white minority and the black majority in the 90s after the release of Nelson Mandela, again, someone whose legacy is also very complicated, but there you go. You look at it now, they've only got power for 4 hours a day, they're confiscating land from white farmers, and they're practicing a version of racial communism. And that's what a lot of the Marxists behind Black Lives Matter at the time, that people were uncovering, wanted to do. They weren't looking for racial justice, which is obviously the cloak and dagger of what a lot of people wouldn't disagree with. This is the reason why they told people to get on their knees. They wanted to show a kind of collective guilt of all white people, to make concessions to what they said were all black people. What they really meant was their self-appointed community leaders, these activists, that were grifting off of racial resentment they were inventing in order to line their own pockets. And this is the consequences. People that think that their own country fundamentally hates them, when really the only racism in British law is against the straight white men that the Times didn't bother interviewing. What's
interesting as well, I mean, the Black Lives Matter stuff was, you know, almost, if you were a PR company, or you'd be really proud, your timing was brilliant, because just at a time when firms were, you know, doing everything they could to showcase and preen their whiskers of equality, you know, somebody knocks on the door and says, "Hi, we're from the Diversity Emporium. You know, we want to make your staff less racist." It's like, well, in fact, come on in. In you come. $5 a time, no problem, sir. There you go, ka-ching. And people jumped on board because they were scared to be seen as, you're the company that wouldn't join in with the anti-racism stuff. So, what does that say about you then? You know, it was all of that guilt stuff.
Well, this is why after 2020, of the S&P 100 companies in the US, 94% of new jobs went to non-whites, either immigrants or Americans. So there's this massive hiring drive for people purely on the colour of their skin. And did GDP per capita improve? Did corporate efficiency improve? No, we had a competency crisis. And this is why I think there's lots of young men and lots of young women as well, and some ethnic minorities, large shares of them came over, if not a majority, voted for Donald Trump, because they turned around and went, right, the economy sucks, all your identity grievances are dividing me, trying to stop my ability to have a family, have a house, have a well-paying job, and so we're going to set all of that aside and go back to competency and get rid of anti-white racism. And I just wish we had the same thing here. Instead, it seems to me that even in the framing of the polling, we're marginalising those voices and putting forward voices that import American race politics.
Yeah. And it's kind of strange, because you do wonder where, I mean, that you talked about the importing of kind of that American, the sort of Americanisms and the way that it's defined by some of those groups. I remember just on the back of Black Lives Matter, we tried to get them on the show. I think there was 2 girls interviewed in the Mail and said, we're scared to go out at night in case we get killed by the police. And it's like, why did you just say that? 2 young black girls scared to go out because in case we get killed by the police. And there was literally no stats or anything to back this up. And death by police is very, very rare in this country, and it hardly, you know, when it has happened, I think the last couple of cases have actually been white people, but you know, when it has happened, it's been altercation bound. You know, the idea that the police just drive around in a car with a gun just firing at people, particularly if they're not white. I mean, it's a nonsense, but it was that importing of and catastrophizing something to the point of essentially lies and invention.
Well,
but there's clearly young people, some that think that stuff.
There's a massive overestimation, if you ask particularly self-described Democrats in America, of how many black Americans are killed by the police every year. They think it's in the number of the tens of thousands. It's like less than 100, despite having a higher per capita rate of police interactions than most white Americans. But obviously the majority still killed are white Americans, because they're the majority of the population. And the same thing happens here. Unfortunately, if you look at things like violent crimes, there is an overrepresentation in London of particularly fatherless young black men. Now, you should be targeting that if you should have those interventions if you want to save black lives, because not only are they predominantly killing other black men, but if you want to stop them from getting into lethal altercations with the police, then you want to stop them committing crimes in the first place. But instead, they act as if the police are the provocation. And this is why we get into the territory of things like non-crime hate incidents.
Yes.
That's based on anti-racist police guidance. Because the police don't want to be called racist, as they were with the Macpherson report in 1999, they now have to prove they're anti-racist by going out of their way to record non-criminal hate speech against law-abiding members of the public.
And you don't hear a thing really from the Mayor of London on any of those deaths.
Well, he shut down the gangs task force because it profiled too many non-white gangs.
If you were, you know, I don't know, talking about ULEZ cameras, he'll bang on about that all day long. Bad cars, you know, but people walking around with machetes, you know, haven't got anything to say about that. Bad cars, got loads to say about that. Crazy. Connor, we will speak again soon.
Pleasure as always.
Connor Tomlinson with us here on